So the gameplay trailer for Planet Zoo, as well as another small trailer with the wolf, has been revealed. And yeah, probably we have all the information now that we will have for some time. I think it will probably take at least some weeks until we get more information. And yeah, the game is going to come out in 4 months. That's a long time. I hope that time will pass quickly. Um, and this is why I now wanted to talk about everything we know and my thoughts on that. So all the things that are now kind of explained through the trailers or hinted at, and what are my thoughts on these on all these mechanics, how they're going to work. So first of all, I am really excited for this game. This sequel um, does a lot of things better than the first game. It fixes a lot of the main issues of the first game, especially the graphical ones. So the graphic looks amazing, and it's like the main thing I'm excited for, because that was one of my main issues with Planet Zoo. This goes for stuff like the terrain. The terrain looks much better. First of all, like the terrain in Planet Zoo, it tended to look very bland. It lacked contrast. It had very low resolution, and there were also just 4 types of terrain. There was basically just dirt, grass, sand, and rock. Now we seem to have a lot more variety in terrain. So in some of these trailers and some of these screenshots, we have seen stuff like gravel. We've seen leaf litter in every biome, not just the tropical one. We've also seen stuff like red textures. So in some of these scenes and some of these screenshots, we see like something that glitters or like shines like it's wet. So yeah, there seem to be a lot more variation with these textures, and also they seem to have a much higher resolution. Of course, everything has, but they also have like this shading effect. So where the terrain, even though it's a flat surface, it looks 3-dimensional because of the shading. So yeah, the textures look a lot better. Speaking of the shading, the rocks, they also have this shading on their surface. They look very detailed, a lot more detailed than what we've seen so far, and especially when it comes to like the shape of the rocks. Um, in the first game, we had 2 types of rocks. We of course had the false rocks, which looked like very fake, and then we had the natural rocks, and they looked a bit too natural for my taste. Because as I said before, rocks that you have in a zoo aren't the type of rocks that would have been sitting in a forest for 1,000 years or in some river. And this is how the rocks in Plains Zoo looked like. They were like having this very weathering effect, looked almost moldy. And this is not something you would see in a zoo, because the rocks there will be quote unquote fresh rocks. So the type of rocks you would get from a quarry, because that's where they get their rocks from. They're not going to some natural environment and just taking a rock from there. That's first of all illegal, and also it's way too much work. But they're getting their rocks. Either the rocks are artificial rocks, so they're made with like a false rocks. They're made with some kind of skeletal structure and then plaster on top of it, or concrete on top of it, or they're like quarry rocks, which means they're going to be very edgy, very fresh. Yeah, and the rocks that we have in the sequel, apparently they seem to be like this in between normal natural rocks and these false rocks. But the main thing that has received an update is the plants. You might know I'm all about the plants in these games, and the plants in Planet Zoo 2 look so good. Some of them look not that good. They kind of look a little bit better than in the first game, but not a super huge difference. But some of them look incredible, especially all the small plants that you have on the ground, like the grasses and the likes. Like there are some of them that we see in like the scene with the giraffes, where like there's like these little field plants. I don't know what they're called. That you see in enclosures, or that you see like on growing on fields, especially when they're like unmaintained. And this is something that also happens in enclosures, because these enclosures, they are not maintained. Okay, there's no one going to cutting the lawn in the lion enclosure. So this is especially in these predator enclosures, you have a lot of stuff just growing relatively wild and relatively uncontrolled. And that was something I was really missing in Planet Zoo. There was like grass, but there weren't any, at least not a lot of these non-grass field plants, I'm going to call them. There's stuff like little flowers as well. So in the first game, we have had these massive clusters of flowers, these whole fields of flowers, which was practical to cover large areas, but not if you wanted like a single flower somewhere, if you wanted to put like a little bit of detail somewhere. And detailing stuff in Planet Zoo was very hard, and it has gotten a lot easier now. I think the thing that impressed me the most is like in the scene with the chimpanzees. You have like these little grasses on the ground that are just very dry and extremely tiny, extremely fragile. Like they have a very high resolution. Um, this is something that we haven't seen in the game at this point. It just looks so incredibly detailed and realistic. Like that really blew my mind. Um, Also, these trees that we see in the shot with the eagle, where they have like the eagle flying. The trees that we see in the background, they just have such a high resolution. The conifers, especially. Also in the foreground, we once again have this grass that has really such a high resolution that it still looks good up close. That's like insane. And the conifers, especially like the deciduous trees, the temperate ones, they don't look that good to me, which is kind of sad because that was already an issue in Planet Zoo. Like the deciduous trees didn't look that good, but the conifers, oh my god, they look so photorealistic. You could like show this to someone and they might think that this is an actual photo. Like this is so realistic. I'm so excited for building with this stuff. And yeah, the main reason why we have more detailed plants, while instead having these, we see this in some shots that there's actually some smaller flowers, some smaller singular flowers. And the main reason why we have stuff like that is why that stuff is possible is because they seem to be or not they seem to be, but there is a plant brush now. The same type that we have in Prehistoric Kingdom, that we have in Jurassic World Evolution. So now you are able to brush entire fields of plants. And this, of course, makes the need for these big clusters of plants really unnecessary. And yeah, I'm really excited for that. Like the plant brush, I don't know if I'm going to use it that much because I'm really a fan of planting everything individually and yeah, adding a lot of detail to every inch of my zoos. But especially for larger enclosures, I have to admit that this is going to be very useful. And there's also a lot more other detailing. Like, for example, in the scene with the plant brush, we see that there's also pebbles that apparently you can also brush. It's also something we didn't really have in the first game. There were like these little pebbles, but you have to place all of them individually. And there was like not a lot of them. And now we at least have like 6 different pebble piles that you can use for enclosures that are not like have grass, but like caprine enclosures that are going to have going to be more mountainous, stuff like that. So yeah, there's also a lot more sticks and twigs and stuff like that. Especially in the scene with like the beavers, we see that. There's a lot of different sticks. So this is also something that was really lacking from the first game, having like these little sticks and twigs. For that's stuff that I'm all really excited about. The detailing in this game that you will be able to do in your enclosures, that's going to be insane, really. Also, we now have confirmation about how the aviaries work. So we can see in one of these scenes that they are actually modularly generated. That doesn't make sense, but you essentially what I said before, you place down a barrier and then you place down these poles. You can even tilt these poles. That is incredibly cool. They don't have to be straight. And then the game will automatically generate a mesh, will automatically generate a net between the barriers and the poles, which is insane. You can even like change how much the net is sagging, if it's more straight, more like stretched, or if it's actually sagging down a bit. Well, that is absolutely insane. And yeah, that also confirms that the birds will be flying freely and you have to build structures in order to keep them in. I really hope that they will also be stopped by modular pieces. So if I don't want to use this net aviary, but instead I want to build something like a cage, which a lot of zoos still have, or if I just want to build a tropical house where they can fly around inside, I of course don't want to have a net in that case. So I really hope that you will not need the net to stop them, but they will also be stopped by modular pieces. But I would assume so. Now, all these things being out of the way, we also have to talk a little bit of my concerns about this game. Some of the things that kind of worry me. And one of them is the path. So in one of the scenes where they build the path, you can see that the minimum width for paths is once again 4 meters, which is again way too big. Like, that's the minimum width. Now, if you go into a real zoo and look at how wide the paths are, some of them are going to be 4 meters. Maybe some of them are even going to be 5 meters. But wider than that, I think would be really rare. And there's going to be a lot of paths as well that are going to be closer to like 3 or 2 meters or even 1 meters, especially if you are like in some special area. If you're inside a tropical house, they're going to be smaller or more narrower paths. Or inside of an aviary, you're not going to have a 4-meter path. So I wish that Frontier would fix this. I don't really know. I don't really think they will. But yeah, this is something that was extremely annoying in the first game, but it kind of made sense because it felt like the first game was more so built to be like a safari park game, less than a zoo game initially. And they later switched that kind of. But now that we already have a lot smaller animals, we have the scaling and all that, I don't see a reason why they shouldn't be smaller paths. I don't really want to wait until someone mods free build again before you can make smaller paths. Like, again, because 4 meters, that's just way too big. So yeah, that's one of my concerns, but something that should be very easily fixable by just making the path smaller. Another thing that I noticed is the enrichment items. They seem to be the exact same ones we have seen in the first game. And I have to say, I wasn't really a fan of many of those. Like, we've seen the weird submarine again. Of course, there's like bowls, and that's fine. But like, there's this mirror thing for birds. There's like the same not sprinklers, but the what are they called? The bubble blowing thing. And I'm not really a fan. The pinata also made a return. I'm not really a fan of these things, the way that they look in Planet Zoo in general, because for the most part they just look way too special. When in real life, zoos generally repurpose stuff from somewhere else. So, for example, a bubble blower, I've never seen one that looks like the one in Planet Zoo. Bubble machines online just look a lot different generally. There also is a lot of stuff that is just repurposed from like barrels, from like bolts and tires. That's the kind of stuff that you see in a zoo. That's like basically just trash. One man's trash is the zoo's treasure, essentially. And everything in Planet Zoo seems to be specifically built for the zoo, which I find to be not that realistic. I mean, it's a game, it's fictional, but I really want to build my zoos as authentic as possible, as realistic as possible. And yeah, a lot of these things just look a bit over the top, a bit too bright and too plasticky for me, where I would love to have something more realistically looking. Stuff, I also wish there was more hanging stuff, so like hanging barrels, hanging bowls that the animals can interact with. What I really would want is more natural enrichment items. So basically stuff that functions the same as some of the bowls, or especially the grab bowl that we already had, but are essentially just natural pieces. So for example, rocks for penguins. Penguins love to collect rocks, or sticks for beavers. Why a grab ball when you could just put a stick that just looks like part of the scenery, but then the beaver can just grab it and drag it around. This is something I would really love to see, and it would also create the illusion of the animals interacting more with the environment, which they already seem to be doing. Like the wolf in the trailer reacted to the ball touching it, which is awesome. The pufferfish reacted to another creature. I think it was the keeper, but they might also act like that according to other animals. But yeah, having stuff like sticks and rocks that the animals can drag around and grab, that would be very cool to see. Maybe also some plants that they can interact with beyond just eating them. Yeah, so maybe the plants would just like wiggle around when the animal walks through them, stuff like that. Also, like what I've seen a lot in zoos is blankets for monkeys that they drag around and then lie on it. Yeah, just stuff like that. I also would love to see more big infrastructural enrichment. So in the first game, we essentially just had two, that being the beaver pool, which looked very weird, And the goat climbing walk. The goat climbing walk was one of my favorites. Of course, it would need to be upgraded graphically, but the rocks already look better, so there's that. But the way that the goats could just climb on it was really cool. And stuff like that is something that I really want to see more. Of course, the rock could return, but not only for caprines. I feel like for stuff like baboons or like desert cats, this would also be an option, especially animals that love to climb without being like animals that live where a lot of trees are. Like, again, baboons, they live in savannas, and caracals live in deserts, lions as well. So these animals, they could have something to climb without needing trees or branches in general. On that note, I also want more natural climbing structures, more branches that are climbable. I really hope all of the wood pieces are once again climbable, because in Planet Zoo, a lot of the wood that we've gotten from the later DLCs just weren't climbable for some reason. I don't know why. In the beginning, they added basically everything, every type of wood that they added in was climbable, and then in the later DLCs, like in the Oceania pack, the wood that looked really good, but it wasn't climbable, and I don't know why. So I really hope we will have more natural climbing frames, because in zoos, what they do, once again, they repurpose stuff. Why would you go through all the efforts to smooth out a beam of wood, which is expensive and also not as nice for the animals because they can't grab it as well, if you can just take a branch? You just go to the forest, you just take a branch, a big one, or you just take a dead tree and you just put that in there for them to climb on. That's much more realistic and it looks much better. I don't know why all of the climbing frames were so straight and smooth. That's not really realistic. So that's climbing frames. And also one thing I could imagine would be a water slide, like a water slide. There's like this video of a crocodile sliding down one of these, but they could also be used for stuff like seals and penguins, maybe even hippos. So yeah, stuff like that is something that I really want to see more when it comes to the enrichment. And one thing that we have not seen anything about at all are the exhibits. Beyond a little video of the axolotl that's up close, so you don't really see anything about the exhibit, we don't know how the exhibits are going to function. In the first game, the exhibits were terrible, in my opinion. They were all the same sized glass box. They were zero customizable. There was like, the plants were already in there. The glass, you couldn't change anything about that. So, yeah, when it comes to the exhibits, I really hope they will see some improvements. First of all, don't put anything in there that doesn't need that. I'm specifically talking about the iguana. That was one of the biggest disappointment for me in the first game. Because iguanas are extremely cool animal. They're extremely common in zoos, especially in tropical houses, where they can just roam around freely. I really want to have that in the game and not have it banished to some exhibit. So an iguana has the same type of animation and locomotion as in a monitor lizard, so there's not really any reason to put it in an exhibit. That being said, for smaller animals, for snakes, for arthropods, it makes absolutely sense. I get that. And however, we really need more sizes of exhibits. So the fact that that you have a yellow anaconda in the same exhibit as a little scorpion the size of your finger, that's just insane. We need bigger exhibits for like these big snakes. Instead of having 4x4, maybe having something like 4x8 or even 8x8 or 8x12 even. And for these smaller animals, we really need a lot smaller exhibits. If you go into a zoo and look at like scorpion exhibits, they're mostly like the size of a shoebox. So having something like 0.5 by 1 meter, that would be perfect for all these little critters, for these little insects and our arachnids and all that stuff. So yeah, different sizes, maybe also different shapes. If they were round or 8-shaped exhibits, that would be cool. And most importantly, may give us a null option. Meaning you can turn off the glass, you can turn off the whole casing, you can turn off the plants. So you're just left with the terrain, and you can customize everything. You can put your own plants in there, you can make your own casing around it, or you do not do that, and instead you put them in a tropical house, making it seem like these animals can roam freely, even though they can't. But at least it's implied by the fact that it's just completely open. So yeah, exhibits definitely need a lot of work, and we still don't know how they're going to function at all in this game. But the main thing that worries me is the functionality of the aquariums. Now, until now, we didn't know how the aquariums are going to work in the first place. Um, it was still the question whether they will be exhibits that you just place down. No, they're not. You can actually build them yourself, which is great. But you could technically always do that. Okay, in the first game, you could just place down glass barriers and fill them with water. No problem. I mean, you can still do that, but for some reason, there is a separate tab called aquariums. This is what we see in the trailer when they build the aquarium. So they are the complete separate tab from the barriers, from like the normal habitat barriers, and that already in itself is weird enough, because why do the aquariums have different glass than like the crocodiles when you build underwater views for them? I don't know. On a side note, there also seem to be underwater tunnels. That's just one thing I quickly. Another positive thing. So there is this symbol for a tunnel here, and other people have pointed this out. They seem to be indicating an underwater tunnel, which is great to see. Underwater tunnels are incredibly cool. You could build them in the first game, but basically just by abusing bugs. I have built some underwater tunnels myself, but now you can apparently build them officially, which is great to know. That out of the way, yeah, there's a separate aquarium tab, but what really surprises me in that regard is the way that the keepers get into the aquarium. Because in the first game, we always had the issue that the habitat entrances which is where the keepers get in and the animals are being brought in. They always had to be on land. They always had to be like a 4x4 meter terrain thing there for the keepers to go in. And this meant that everyone who installed fish mods at some point, they know that having these fish crawl into the water on the land just looked extremely weird. So the question was always, and that was one of the main reasons why we didn't get fully aquatics in the first game. But the question was always, how exactly is this going to function? And the way that they solved this is by an airlock. Why an airlock? Like, this is something you will never see in a zoo or aquarium, because it's really pointless. An airlock is extremely expensive. It is extremely complicated and potentially dangerous, or like a safety hazard. And there's no reason for that. There's no reason to install an airlock. This is something that's used in submarines and stuff like that. And there's no reason to use an airlock in an aquarium that's like 10 meters deep, where you can just go in at the top and dive down. And this is what they do in zoos. In every zoo, in every aquarium, and I've done an internship in an aquarium, so I know this stuff. You will just go in at the top. You will just go in through a ladder and not through an airlock. First of all, this means that we have a problem with realism here, which is like, yeah, I guess you can hide it and pretend like it's working like in an actual zoo and build your little ladder there and that stuff. But also, it creates another whole other problem, because this implies two things. First of all, the water depths. I've done the calculations according to what we see in the trailer, and the minimum depth of the water, if it was at the top of the airlock, would be 2 meters. That's already relatively deep if we're talking about smaller aquariums. Okay, for bigger aquariums, the ones with like the sea turtles in them, that's fine. But if you want to build a smaller aquarium, having it be 2 meters deep already is quite a deep aquarium already. And a lot of zoos will have like maybe 1 or 2 of these big aquariums, but then they will have primarily small aquariums. And it seems like you can't really build these in Plain Zoo 2. Also, especially for freshwater aquariums. Freshwater aquariums are going to have generally not as deep water, because I mean they're simulating stuff like rivers. If we want to build stuff in the Amazon, like stuff with iguanas and arapiamas and stingrays, that's going to be a lot harder if the water has like a minimum depth of at least 2 meters. Potentially it's higher than that. Potentially it's like even 3 meters. That's going to be a little bit annoying. But even more is the question, how is that going to function with the rest of the zoo in mind? Does that mean the fish are not going to be compatible with anything else in the zoo? Can you substitute the glass for terrain again? This is something that you could do in the first game. You could have like a water pool that had like half of it encased in terrain, and the other half in glass. And this is how animals would be able to get in there. Because if aquariums are completely separate from normal habitats, can you even mix the fish with other animals? Because that's something I really want to do. I want to have fish in the same water tanks as my crocodiles, as my beavers, as my hippos. Um, and this is something that seems to be impossible now, which is quite sad. I wanted to build like an Amazon enclosure that has like capybaras alongside with sea turtles, not sea turtles, freshwater turtles, caimans, and then of course the freshwater fish. And how is it going to affect the way that the reserves, the nature reserves work? A lot of people have been calling to the nature reserves when it comes to like cetaceans, because they say, okay, if you don't want to have cetaceans in the zoo, then you at least can have them in the nature reserve. And that is something that is kind of seems impossible now, because how are you going to put these whales in a nature reserve if you're going to need an airlock for that? Same goes for building like coral reefs and stuff like that in the nature reserve. Imagine you want to build like a coastline that has jungle on one side, and on the other side you have like the ocean with coral reefs in that. That would be incredibly amazing to build, but right now it seems almost impossible because of these airlock systems. You get my problem with it. So I'm kind of still looking forward to how they're going to solve this. If I really hope that the aquariums are going to be compatible with stuff like terrestrial habitats with animals that go into the water. Uh, I really want to have stuff like fish in all my lakes and ponds in the zoo. If I build a lake somewhere in the zoo, maybe for my waterfowls, I really want to have like some carp swimming around in there, which currently with this airlock system almost seems impossible. So I'm kind of worried on how that's going to work. Um, Besides all that criticism now, I'm still looking forward to this game. I'm really, really excited for this game, and I will play so much of it. Even with these problems I just mentioned, there's still problems that just essentially have been in the first game. It's nothing that is worse than the first game. It's just things that uh, were already a problem in the first game that they could have improved. But nonetheless, there's a lot of stuff that they have improved, especially the graphics, the way that the plants work, the animals interacting with the environment seems to be massively improved. And we have flying birds, we have fish, even if they're not compatible with the rest of the animals. It's still amazing to have these in the first place. So yeah, I think everyone that was into Planet Zoo and is into these kind of games is incredibly excited for Planet Zoo 2. I am pre-ordering this game, definitely. I still don't know if there will be like a beta that you can play the game beforehand, which was the case for Planet Zoo. I still don't know if Planet Zoo 2 is going to be at Gamescom where you can test it. I really hope it is. So yeah, we will see what the game brings, what more news they will bring, and I will probably top my 3,300 hours I had in Planet Zoo with this game, because it seems to have so much potential. Alone the detailing work that you can do on the enclosure, that it's just amazing. So yeah. Until then, let me know your thoughts if you have any other opinions about that, or if you have any other ideas how Frontier could solve these problems potentially, and what your thoughts are on the game and everything we've seen so far in general. And yeah, then until we see us next time.